Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Youth Eco Restorers for Climate mini conference. We're really glad to have you all with us, and I'm very excited to share our three amazing speakers with you this morning. I'm going to start off by giving a little bit of an introduction to Bio for Climate for anyone who's not familiar or anyone who would like to learn more about us. So to give a brief introduction, the simplest way to describe what we do here at Bio for Climate is that our mission is very straightforward. It is reversing global warming by restoring ecosystems. And so we do that through education, policy, and outreach. We promote nature-based climate solutions, such as regenerative agriculture, to solve the climate crisis. And so we also do this by public information campaigns, scientific investigation. We have a collection of scientific findings for ecosystem restoration. We network with a bunch of other organizations, groups, and individuals doing restoration work around the globe. And we also do youth outreach, such as this conference, college outreach program, and even hands-on projects like planting Miyawaki forests, which are pocket forests. We currently have one in Nechí Park in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And so that's a brief introduction about Bio for Climate. And like I said before, today we are very excited to introduce you to our three speakers. We organized this conference with the goal of sharing the voices and stories of young people in the climate movement, specifically those who are doing work similar to what we promote at Bio for Climate, which is restoration and regeneration. And we just want to amplify their stories, their voices, and their advice so that you can come out of this conference with inspiration and ideas for how to move forward through the climate movement yourself. So today we have Sergio E.L. Báez, who will speak about ecosystem restoration. He is an ecosystem restoration land steward, and he is going to talk about his projects and experiences working directly with the land. We have Ayushi Gaur, who is going to speak about artivism, which is the intersection between art and climate activism, and Carol Viana, who will talk about environmental advocacy. And so a very warm welcome to all of our speakers and all of our participants. And I'm going to hand it over to Tanya, who's going to introduce our first speaker.
Thank you, Abby. Well said. Yes, our first speaker, as Abby mentioned, is Sergio Esteban Lozano-Báez, and he is based in Popayán, Cauca in Colombia, which is mountaintops area in Colombia. He is a mountain restoration steward of this year for Global Landscapes Forum, which is a huge organization. So it's just amazing that his work with the nonprofit Selva is getting recognized by that organization. And he is restoring it by planting native trees, which is just restoring habitat for endangered species in Colombia. If y'all don't know, Colombia is a country with the second most biodiversity in the world. So it's very important that we restore the ecosystems there, not just for Colombia, but for the world. And so, Sergio, please take us into your amazing world of eco-restoration. And yes, thank you for being here.
Thank you, Tanya. Thanks for the invitation. I'm really happy to be here. So I can share my screen right now, no? Okay. 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 It's okay. Do you see my presentation?
Yes, perfect.
Okay, perfect. Well, as I say, I'm really happy to be here. Thank you very much again. I want to start this presentation with sounds of the birds of the project. So please turn up this volume of your computer and let's hear for a few seconds the sounds of these beautiful birds. Well, as you hear, this is the Tolima dove. The scientific name is Leptotila conoveri. And the other one that I want to present, this one. So let's hear. Oh, no. And this one is the yellow-headed brooch finch. Also, we can call this bird as Atlapetes flavicet. And I wanted to present these two birds because they are the heart of our project that is called, and the title of the project is Sustainable Landscape for the Tolima Dove and the Yellow-headed Prongfish in Tolima, Colombia. This project was developed by Selva organization, that is an NGO here in Colombia that work with birds and make a lot of research in this topic. And the project was also financed funding by the American Bird Conservancy. So my idea in these few minutes with you is to share my experience with the project, what I have learned, and what you can have some inspiration for your projects. The project has different phase steps, and the one was to know the population of the birds, because as I said, these two birds are endangered species that are also endemic. This means that they are also can be found here in Colombia. They not exist in any other country in the world. It's important to remember that Colombia is the country where you can find the higher numbers of bird species. So we are really strong in birds species, and they are really beautiful. So Selva started the project through an intensive research initiative beginning in 2017. They started to collect data to understand the population density, the habitat use, the diet of these bird species. And what they found in this research is that these two bird species are associated with an ecosystem that is where the cover is more clean pasture, coffee crops, or secondary vegetation. And the altitude of where you can find, as you maybe know, is that Colombia is a country of mountains. So you can find altitude between 0 meters and 3,000 meters above sea level. And these two bird species are between 1,000 and 2,000 meters. And curiously, this is the same area, this altitude, where you can find the coffee production in Colombia. So in this phase one, they selected different areas and prioritized the sites where the population of the bird species can be found. So in the case of Atlapetes, they selected these three areas in Tolima, and Ibagué, Planadas, Roncesvalles. And for the dove, they also selected these other three areas in Líbano, Ibagué, and Chaparral. And when they selected these areas, they started the second phase, that is the socialization with the community. They say, hey, look, what we found is these two species that are endangered, that are your species that are in your area. We want to work with you. And they started to prioritize more where they can implement the forest restoration actions. So in 2018 and 2019, they developed this phase, and finally, I entered in the project for the implementation of the forest restoration action in 2020, and this is like the area looks. This is a typical landscape of coffee here in Colombia. So what we're gonna do if we want to recover the population and to help these species to survive and to improve the population, we have to start to think in forest restoration actions. And this was my role during 2 years. And what I started to look when I start the project is that in the coffee landscape, you find threats. For example, in this picture, you can see the river without vegetation, all the sedimentation, and all this associated with the landslide and erosion that you can see. And all this is consequence of the bad land use, and also for the climate change. In these cases, the last year, for example, the raining has increased a lot in the area. In 1 year, the rain has not stopped. So the consequence is that you can see the landslide and the erosion in all these farms, and it's a problem that you have to solve. And this is a way to start to find how I can implement my forest restoration action, where I can implement the forest restoration. And in the other hand, with the coffee crops, you see that most of the coffee is in sun-grown coffee, where you don't see many trees. So this is bad for the biodiversity and for the soil. And what we want in the project was to transform these areas to a shade-grown coffee, like you see here in the picture. So it was a beautiful process with the communities. And all this is articulated with the moment that we are living in today, that is the decade of ecosystem restoration. That when you start the project, it's also important that the community know that we are at this moment in this decade. So some of the achievement of our project here was that we, with this strategy of prioritize restoration areas, to select endangered species, to work with the community, we achieved the implementation of 53 hectares of different restoration areas. We planted 20,000 trees, and we worked with 30 farmers, and also with the farmer we signed agreement of conservation that is really important in the project. We can observe also the potential of this strategy to upscale the forest restoration actions, not only in this region, but in different areas of Colombia. Different restoration approaches that we implemented in the project was, for example, the assisted passive restoration, where you observe pasture with low productivity and you have to plant trees in the clears. Here we perceived that was really important to achieve the successful of the area, to make the enclosing of the area. So we were on this. Another area that we were in the project was this, where you can find and observe that the soil is highly degraded. In these areas, the recovery process is very slow. So maybe think in decompaction action of the soil first is really important. Other area was implemented with active restoration. It's also hard. It's really simple to show a picture of the area, but to plant the trees here, to prepare the soil, to clean and cut the area to plant the trees is a work, a hard work, I can say this, but that you have to do to make that the trees that you plant can survive. If you don't do this, you won't have a success in the forest restoration. So it's really important in this process of planting trees and to the forest restoration, the maintenance of these trees is not only plant trees and say, hey, we plant 100 or 1,000 of trees. It's not only this, it's a process that you have to consider. Also, this is a process when we talk about forest restoration, it's a high and expensive process, especially when you have to include these all steps, cleaning the area, to enclose the area, to buy the different materials, the job that you have to provide, the seedling productions is very expensive, but the results we can observe in a few months if we do correctly all the steps. It's also important to involve the different actors in the territory. So not only work with the small farmer, you also need to work with a bigger farmer, with different institutions that they must know what the project wants in the territory and why we are doing forest restoration. And this picture show a pure example of this, where you can see different military and farmers, kids, and different persons planting the trees in the area that was enclosed. Other observation and that I like to show is that when you select the tree that you want to plant in the area, this must have a reason. In this case, we want to a species that grow really fast, that can compete with the invasive species. So in this case, you can see a native species, also known as árbol loco, Montanoa quadrangularis, that only with 5 months, this is bigger than me. You know, the growth, it's really fast. So they are key species in the forest restoration process. Also, another way to work with the farmers and with the local community is to show what they can do in their farms, in the area, to protect the birds and the species in our project. So we elaborate with them different strategies to share with them. We also work with this app called it eBird and iNaturalist, that are public application that they feel that they are doing something when they collect the data with this application to the project and to the area. So it was really nice to develop different workshops and restoration to show the experience and the growth of the species, all that we are doing in the area. It was really nice to do this. And I want to ask you something here is what happened after 1 or 2 years of implementation of forest restoration is that all this need money, and when you implement this and you don't think in anything more than plant trees, the money will end, your project will finish without money. So this happened the last year when I, fortunately, to continue the project, I win the Restoration Steward, so I can have more funds to continue with the project. So in this sense, what I do is to monitoring, and we planted the trees, and now what we are doing is to continue the project, doing the monitoring and maintaining of these trees that were planted, thanks to the Global Landscape Forum and the Restoration Steward. To have an idea of what I have been doing this year in the project, I want to share with you this video. So let's see.
Muy buenos días a todos. Mi nombre es Sergio Lozano, Restoration Steward para el ecosistema de montaña del año 2022. En el día de hoy nos encontramos en una de las áreas en proceso de restauración ecológica que hacen parte del proyecto que intenta mejorar el hábitat de 2 especies de aves endémicas de Colombia y que están en peligro de extinción, la caminera tolimense y el atlapetes de anteojos. Para conocer un poco más del proceso que estamos viendo los resultados el día de hoy, tenemos al señor Luis Alarcón. Buenos días, don Luis.
Muy buenos días, Sergio, ¿cómo ha estado?
Muy bien. Bueno, don Luis, cuéntenos, hace 20 meses, me acuerdo que vinimos acá y plantamos los arbolitos. Quiero que nos cuente cómo era el área hace 20 meses.
Bueno, pues hace 20 meses esto era un terreno, obviamente no había ni un árbol, solamente habían pasto, que es un pasto como invasor, no se encontraba ninguna especie de árbol en ese entonces.
Y entonces, ¿qué se hizo para poder tener estos arbolitos el día de hoy?
Lo primero que se hizo fue pues, adecuar en una parte que es el vivero, se consiguieron las especies de semillas que hay en este sector y se pusieron a germinar para hacer lo que llaman el germinador.
Y acá en el terreno, ¿cómo fue la plantación de los árboles?
Bueno, lo primero que se hizo fue la limpia del terreno, digamos, porque esto era un pasto bastante alto y se guadañó, se limpió, se adecuó el terreno.
Ok. Y posteriormente de plantados los arbolitos, ¿qué se ha hecho?
Se ha venido haciendo el mantenimiento cada 3 meses, puesto que los árboles pequeños toca hacerles un mantenimiento constante para que el pasto no lo vaya a tapar y se muera. Entonces se le hizo cada 3 meses un mantenimiento, se le ha venido haciendo hasta ver hoy en día el resultado.
Y como podemos escuchar, las aves que ya nos acompañan el día de hoy. Y no siendo más, don Luis va a hacer el mantenimiento. Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias a ustedes.
Yo me iré a monitorear los árboles. Hasta una próxima.
Muy amables.
So this was what I wanted to show you, and to finish this presentation, I just want to highlight some bottlenecks that I perceive not only in this project, but also in different restoration projects around the world. And they are, first, the long-term fundings. We observed that the project only have this funding for 1, 2, or maybe 3 years, but think in funding in long-term, more than 10 years, 20 years, is hard. And we need this to think in long term. Also, it's important to highlight that there is a missing of sustainable business model in forest restoration. Some projects, the only goal that they have is plant trees. Yes, it's nice to plant trees, but the people and the person that are in the territory needs this sustainable business model to ensure that the tree that we plant in a project can survive. Other bottleneck is the trekking and the growth of the trees. Most of the project plant the trees, but they don't know what happened with the tree after 6 months or after a year. So here it's really important to start to include different technologies to monitoring and tracking the growth of the trees. And finally, the low diversity and seed supplies in the project is really poor. So we need project with more diversity of the species and with an idea to supply seeds in the project that it's really hard to find a high quality seeds to produce in the nurseries. So this is what I wanted to show, and I will stop my share screen. Thank you, Tanya. Thank you all.
Thank you, Sergio. Round of applause for Sergio. That was amazing. I loved all the pictures. I feel like, well, my work is this behind a computer screen. So whenever we talk about restoration, we really want to see those visuals, right? People like that whole picture of the mountainside of different actors planting and actively doing the work. As Sergio mentioned, this is hard work. People are bending down, you know, it can be backbreaking work. And so, yes, just thank you for sharing all of that with us. And I agree, we have to make sure we get more money, more resources into projects like this, or else, I mean, they won't happen. So thank you, Sergio, so much. That was amazing. And yeah, it really did inspire me to get out behind my computer screen and go start planning, because if we don't do it, who will, right? So yes. And with that, that is not our only amazing presentation today. We have 2 more. So Abby, why don't you introduce the next amazing speaker?
Thank you, Tanya. What a wonderful presentation. I agree with everything you said. It's very inspiring. And I am very excited to introduce Ayushi Gaur, who's our next speaker. And Ayushi is a member of the Roots and Shoots National Youth Leadership Council, which is a program of the Jane Goodall Institute. Roots and Shoots is a youth program that essentially promotes youth activism and gives young people the tools and resources to create the change they wish to see in the world through a 4-step formula. And typically youth leaders projects focus on people, animals, or the environment. And Ayushi's project, Conserve Action, is intersectional. So it combines people and the environment by having an intersectional approach to climate activism, which is to combine art and climate activism or advocacy. So essentially, Ayushi gathers artists, especially youth artists, who create artwork related to nature and advocacy for the environment and climate action. In addition to that, she is currently a college freshman at the College of Charleston, and she is doing a double major in marine biology and dance, which I think is super amazing. So without further ado, I am going to introduce Ayushi.
Thank you for that introduction. I'm gonna share my screen. Can you guys see this okay?
Yes, perfect.
Okay. So hi everyone, I'm Ayushi Gaur. I'm from Memphis, Tennessee, but right now, like Abby said, I'm living in Charleston, South Carolina for college, and I'm really excited to be here today and talk to you all about my work. So I'm going to start by sharing this graph from 2019. After looking at it, you're able to see that it is showing the data behind the issue of deforestation in the Amazon rainforest. One can easily look at this graph and see that there's a concern, but in order to get people to really care about an issue, we need to find a way to depict this data so that our audience can personally connect with it.
Sorry, does anybody see like a black box covering the presentation?
Yes.
Ayushi,
I think it's your
Zoom.
it's probably your chat
Is it
window.
this?
Yeah.
Is that better?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay,
think
great.
keep
Thank
your
you.
Zoom windows away because they're creating black boxes wherever they are.
Let me see is there one on the bottom too?
It's kind of out of the way, so I think you're okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, thank you. So I'm gonna put up a second image here. Can you guys see that?
Yes, perfect.
Okay, so in this second image, the viewer can really start to see the part that they play in the story of the data in the first image. Out of the two images, this is probably the one that the viewer is going to remember, but that doesn't necessarily make it the more important one. We need the data in the first image to back up our message, but we can't forget the important role that creativity has in science, especially when sharing our research with the general public. So I started Conserve Action Project to highlight the intersections of the creative arts with the environmental movement, and also to provide a space for all people to show their work, like the collage you see here, which is a submission to my project titled Eating Our Way Through the Amazon Rainforest from an artist, Ben Carter in Luxembourg. In my project's online collection, you will find other environmentally focused artwork submitted by artists around the world, and you'll also find some of my own work in there. So a little bit about myself, like I said earlier, and like Abby said, I'm currently in Charleston for undergrad, and I'm pursuing a double major in dance and marine biology. Outside of those areas, I'm also interested in visual art and music. When I'm not dancing or in class, I like to play piano and alto saxophone and also work on projects with roots and shoots. So if any of you are not familiar with Roots and Shoots, it's the youth program of the Jane Goodall Institute. It is a global movement of youth who are taking action for issues that matter to them by working on projects that benefit our planet and all of those who inhabit it. Like many people in the organization, I got involved with Roots and Shoots because of Dr. Jane Goodall. She's one of my biggest inspirations, and what I'm especially inspired by is her method of making change by taking action with empathy. I really wanted to be a part of that change making, and that seemed to be what Roots and Shoots was all about. So I registered on their website and I started a few small projects in my community. My favorite project that I started and have continued to grow is Conserve Action Project, which is the project that I'm talking to you guys about today. So even though I started Conserve Action Project while I was in my Memphis community, it's primarily an online space. On my website, which you can see here, you'll not only find the online collection of art, which is always open for submissions, but you'll also find some easily accessible resources, climate education resources that I've created to work creativity into science education for a more impactful learning experience. So here are some more examples of art pieces in the collection. On the top left is one of my pieces, which highlights all of the alternate names for palm oil that can sometimes be like hidden in the ingredients list of products. The piece in the center is by an Australian artist, Amy Griffiths, and it focuses on the issues of shark hunting for fins. And then the two images on the right relate to climate change worsening the issue of wildfires, specifically in the West and Northwest America. So all of these pieces are shown with artist statements on my site. So those statements can share information on the issue that the piece is depicting, or even share resources to take action against that issue. So under the resource page on my site, you can primarily find my environmental education tools or challenges. There's one focused on deforestation for palm oil production, another focused on the negative aspects of industrial agriculture, especially in regards to the meat and dairy industry. But the one I'm going to talk a little bit more about today is my most recent project, the Healthy Soil Challenge. The purpose of this challenge is to introduce learners of all ages to an inspiring climate crisis solution and show them ways that they can work towards fighting the climate crisis in their own lives. It's broken down into 3 parts: Know, which includes an overview on climate change and carbon sequestration; Grow, which goes into the basics of gardening and composting; and finally Go, which includes a guide to food labels and grocery shopping with our soil's health in mind. So this is just a screen recording of me clicking through one of the interactive animations that's a part of this project. So programming with digital illustrations is another way that I can use art to make information more engaging and accessible. The biggest challenge that I've faced in my art and activism work is engagement. I have had trouble with social media because my audience is always eager to like and share and repost my posts, but I receive very little participation in any true action items. So this more interactive artistic work is something that I'm still experimenting with, but I think it's going to be a valuable tool in my future work because it can get a younger audience engaged, especially. So this Healthy Soil Challenge is the project that I've received the least engagement with so far, but I'm currently working on ways to promote it with younger students in my new community here in Charleston, especially with doing some in-person work, which I haven't gone into very much. I'm constantly experimenting with new methods of creation to see which of my projects are most successful, but I know that I'll also need to work on new ways of publicizing my projects, especially ways that go beyond social media. So I'm going to conclude with the art form that I'm most familiar with, which is dance. The piece you see here was inspired by 2019 IUCN data, which showed that over half of the world's endangered species and almost all critically endangered species could be lost within a century. So I used transition effects between the clips of me dancing to show the passage of time, and the movements get increasingly faster towards the end of the dance to represent the race against humanity causing a 6th mass extinction. I'm showing this piece to demonstrate how environmental issues can be communicated in so many different ways, and that the submissions to my project are not limited to visual art. In Memphis, I had the opportunity to choreograph 2 pieces over 2 years that communicated environmental topics through dance, one being about whale fall and ocean ecosystems, and the other being about the 2 most rapidly melting glaciers in the Antarctic. I hope to continue to choreograph here in Charleston and also to create more work like the one on the screen here that can be accessible online from any location. Dance is one of the most impactful ways I'm able to communicate issues related to climate science data, so it's the method that I want to explore most going forward. That being said, I'll keep it as a part of a larger resource. A dance alone cannot make the change. In my work, I have to keep finding ways to go beyond just spreading awareness, ways to work towards the goal of every person who sees my work having the free resources to learn about the issue, and then most importantly, to take action for it. So with that, I'm going to conclude my presentation. Thank you all so much for listening. Anyone can get involved with my project, no matter how old you are, where you are in the world, or even like where you are in your journey of climate education. You can submit art of any kind to the online collection, or you can check out the free climate education resources that are available on my site. Also, feel free to reach out to me through Instagram or email, which I've listed here. Again, thank you so much for listening to my presentation today.
What a wonderful presentation. Thank you, Ayushi. Yes, a round of applause. There are so many elements of your presentation that I really loved, including the last part you talked about, which is access to information and resources. And that's something that you've really worked on incorporating into your project. So not just creating a virtual online gallery, but also helping create a source for learning more and also to help people take action after they're inspired by the artwork that they see. And I think that is super awesome. And I also love that you talked about some of the challenges with engaging people that you found with this project, and also how you're thinking through the process of, finding solutions to that, because I think that's a really important part of being an activist, is that sometimes the projects that we create or campaigns that we work on have some obstacles, and it's a really important thing to be able to talk about those and talk about the solutions that we're brainstorming to solve those. So thank you so much for your presentation. I was so inspired by it and really loved seeing all of the artwork as well. So thank you. And I will pass it back to Tanya, and she's going to introduce our third speaker.
Yes, thank you, Ayushi. I don't consider myself an artist, but I want to be one now because that looks like so much fun and also so important. Not everyone wants to, look at data. I definitely do not. So I will be looking at that site way more. And so our last but not least, this is going way faster than I thought. These are just amazing presentations, and I know Carol will just wrap it up in a bow. And so Carol is based in Brazil, and Carol Viana, she co-founded a nonprofit, Chloride Free, and they advocate for regenerative agriculture. So not using chemicals, not using pesticides. As Sergio mentioned, he's in a forest area. Well, the Brazil is more forest. They also have the Amazon, but they have the largest piece of the Amazon. And as Ayushi mentioned, there's a lot of deforestation there. So that's why regenerative agriculture is so important where Carol lives. But Carol is not just focusing on Brazil. She's also using international platforms like the United Nations, YOUNGO. I always have trouble with that. And so they are the youth aspect of climate change of the United Nations. And so using those international platforms, Carol's not only advocating for Brazil and regenerative agriculture, but also putting them on a map, because I do think that it's important for these youth leaders to be part of those international conversations. We can't just have older people. We can't just have people who are in the United Nations. We need to have everyone in these rooms. And so Carol is exemplifying that. So Carol, please take us through all your amazing work. I know you have much more to tell us.
Thank you, Tanya. I'm gonna share my screen. Can you guys see it?
Yes, perfect.
Thank you. So hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here today. And thank you for Tanya, Abby, and the Bio for Climate team for inviting me to be a part of this event. So as Tanya said, my name is Carol Viana, or Carol. I am Brazilian, I'm an environmental engineer, I am a climate activist, and I'm also advocate for soil biodiversity and regenerative agriculture. And when I tell people that I am a soil biodiversity advocate, they usually assume that I have been involved with it, or maybe that I have a background in agronomy, soil science, or microbiology. But that's not the case, and it's actually quite the opposite. So I would like to start this presentation by giving a little bit of background on what I've been doing in my path so far, and maybe try to explain why a girl who has never been interested in agriculture before growing up, and that didn't like getting her hands dirty in soil, and that was terrified of earthworms, ended up becoming obsessed with soil biodiversity. So people usually ask me where my passion for nature comes from and when did it all started, but the truth is I have no idea. I've always been very passionate about nature for as long as I can remember, and I've always felt like this need and kind of, it was my purpose to kind of trying to protect it. And even if back then I didn't know how to do that. But my passion for climate specifically came much later during college when I took a class on carbon markets and learned about climate solutions, because up to that point, I only learned about the science of climate change, and everything I would hear and learn was very dooming and would often make me feel helpless. And when I took that class in college, it was like a switch in my brain that I could see climate change through a different lens and through a more positive lens where I could really find solutions and learn how to fight climate change and bring hope to people. So when I took that class, I knew that I wanted to work in climate and specifically in climate solutions. So I started educating myself about climate change. Like I mentioned, I already knew the science behind it, but what I realize now is that back then I have a very narrow view on how climate change could affect us and also what we should do to stop it. So the more I study it, the more I realize that everything is interconnected. What we eat, what we wear, what we buy, our education, gender equity, social justice. Everything is connected to climate, and we can't solve one problem without solving all of them. And after that, I was like, okay, there's a lot of different areas. There's a lot I can do and trying to make a difference. But which topic should I choose to try to work with? And I have a problem because I'm very curious and I like learning about a lot of different things. And if I stay in one topic for too long, I get kind of bored. So I was struggling to commit to just one topic and trying to make a career out of it. And the only thing I knew is that I did not want to work in agriculture. And we all know that that's not what happened. And just a quick parenthesis, I used to say that because Brazil has a lot of problems in agricultural sector. So we have a lot of agricultural production here in Brazil, and there's a lot of problem with that because we have deforestation, we have land grabbing, we have use of harmful chemicals, we have like disrespect towards traditional communities. So people in Brazil usually see the sector as kind of an environmental villain and see farmers as villains for climate as well. And that's how I used to see it too. So during college and after I graduated, I tried to get a job in climate, but I couldn't find any positions. And so my experiences, my professional experiences were more related to environmental law. So here in Brazil, a lot of environmental engineers go to work in the industry and help them comply to environmental law to make sure that the company complies to environmental law. So that was I was working with, but I did not like that. And I didn't want to work with that in the long run. So I was trying to get a career and trying to get a job in climate. And then the pandemic hit and I was unemployed. And this fertilizer company reached out to me and offered me a position to work with sustainability. And they told me that their fertilizer was natural and it was less harmful to soil biodiversity. And thus it could help us, it could help in the fight against climate change. And all I could think about was, what the hell does soil biodiversity have to do with climate change? And the thing is, I knew sustainable agriculture was better for climate, but I didn't know the specifics of it. And I didn't know the part that soil plays in it as well. So the first thing I did was research about the topic and just trying to make sure that it wasn't just another kind of greenwashing thing. And what I learned really shocked me. So the first thing I learned is that, to my surprise, soil biodiversity isn't just earthworms and ants. So there is a whole universe beneath our feet. And in fact, 1 teaspoon of soil contains more living organisms than are people on the planet. And these organisms are usually separated into three main groups, which are microorganisms and microfauna. Some examples are viruses, bacteria, fungi, and also protozoa and nematodes. We have mesofauna, which are mites and springtails, for example, and then macro and megafauna, that can be earthworms, ants, beetles, and then small mammals. With that, I learned that soil is one of the largest reservoirs of biodiversity on the planet, and it is the home of more than 25% of our planet's biodiversity. And not only that, soil is also a huge carbon sink, and it can store more carbon than the atmosphere and the vegetation combined. So an average of 1,500 gigatons of carbon within soil. And the more I learned about it, the more obsessed I became, and I wanted to know more. So I also learned that soil organisms play an important role in the carbon cycle, which means that these organisms can help soil take carbon from the atmosphere and store it into the soil for decades or even hundreds of years. And they do that by, some bacteria can actually capture CO2 directly from the atmosphere and store it into the soil in the form of organic carbon. But there is a more diverse system of soil organisms, which with the help of plants perform soil carbon sequestration. So plants take carbon CO2 from the atmosphere through photosynthesis, and they transform that into carbon-rich compounds, which they use for energy. But some of those compounds are leaked through the roots into the soil to feed soil organisms. And as these organisms, especially fungi, grow, they continue to absorb these compounds and kind of store this carbon within themselves. And as a result, this carbon will stay stored in soil. And there are also other organisms, such as earthworms and termites, that promote soil carbon stabilization. So this organic carbon that is already in soil, these organisms prevent that this carbon is emitted back into the atmosphere. And then I found this specific study that really amazed me from the Professor David Johnson at New Mexico State University. And he found that if we improve soil biodiversity, especially fungi communities, we would be able to sequester an average of 10 tons of carbon per hectare per year. And if you're asking if that's a lot of carbon or not, I did a quick calculation. So agriculture now occupies about 5 million hectares around the world. So multiplying that area by the soil storage capacity, which is the 10 tons that Professor David Johnson found, we have the potential of capturing 50 billion tons of carbon every year. So in 2019, the total greenhouse gas emissions was around 37 billion tons, but studies show that around 50% of that is already naturally absorbed by the planet, so oceans and forests. So if we deduct the net greenhouse gas emissions from the absorption capacity, we have the capacity of capturing an average of 30 billion tons of greenhouse gases every year, just by improving soil biodiversity in agricultural areas. So this could be an extremely significant strategy to reverse climate change. And I was just there, sitting, reading all these amazing articles and studies. And all I could think about was, why isn't anyone talking about this? This could be a deciding factor of whether or not we'll be able to beat climate change. And the most important thing, the technology or the methodology is already here. We already know what we need to do. So why aren't we doing it? And coincidentally, around the same time, the FAO launched a report on the state of knowledge on soil biodiversity. And again, people were not talking about it. There wasn't anything in the media, there weren't any movements or campaigns. And most of the people talking about soil biodiversity were researchers and professors. And I could see that there was some kind of barrier that made the topic confined within the walls of academia. And it was by that time that I decided to start the Chloride Tree Foundation, which is an NGO with the goal of educating young people about the importance of soil biodiversity. So we would take all the scientific articles and reports on soil biodiversity and create content that is reliable, accessible, and easy to understand, because the information and the knowledge is already there. The scientists and the researchers are already doing this work, but this information is now reaching the general public, and that's what we wanted to do. We thought that if young people are leading the movement against climate change, it only makes sense that they also lead the movement to protect soil biodiversity. But for that to happen, they need to know how important biodiversity is. And that's how I got involved with regenerative agriculture as well, because so much of soil biodiversity and soil carbon is lost in conventional agriculture. And there's no way for me to advocate for soil biodiversity without advocating for regenerative or climate smart agriculture. And if before I would see farmers as climate villains, now I see them as very important players who can change this whole system. And the foundation, a few months ago, I decided to step down from my leadership position at the foundation to focus on some of the other projects I have going on here in Brazil related to traditional communities and nature-based solutions. But everything that is related to agriculture also is related to soil biodiversity. So I also, even to those seemingly unrelated projects, I still try to draw attention to soil biodiversity and educating people about it. We should all be talking about soil biodiversity because more people need to know about this climate solution, because soil biodiversity is a climate solution, and regenerative agriculture and improving soil health can not only help us halt climate change, but it could also help improve food security. It could help us improve people's livelihoods. And if we do it in a holistic way and with the help of policy as well, we can also reduce social and gender inequalities. So like this picture said, we need to listen to the science, but we also need to talk about it. So that's what I had prepared for today. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them. And these are my social media handles if you want to connect. Thank you.
Thank you, Carol. I didn't get to do my round of applause. That was great. I love how each of you talked a little bit about soil, but you really went into it. We did not plan for that, but it worked out perfectly. So like I said, I knew you would wrap it up nicely in a bow. Thank you again. And like you said, there's different aspects to this. It's the science, it's the indigenous knowledge, it's all these different types of knowledge, and then portraying that knowledge. That is definitely what we at Bio for Climate try to do all the time. So thank you again. We're going to get into all the questions. Abby and I have this document that we've been using to write everything that's been in the chat. And so we're kind of just going to go through it one by one. Abby, why don't you start?
Thanks, Tanya. The first question is for Sergio. So the question is, did the 30 farmers that you were talking about in your presentation switch from sun-grown coffee to shade-grown coffee?
Yes, I answered the question directly to Diani. So, but you want, I can answer again. And yes, in some cases, these farmers did the switch, but not all the farmers are coffee farmers. So this happened in some cases. And the other question of Diani was if this bird was pollinators or no. More than pollinator, they are seed dispersers, and they also make an important function in the ecosystem, that is control the pests, and because these birds eat insects, so they are really important to maintain this population.
Thank you, that's super helpful. Tanya, did you want to do the next question?
Sure, the next one isn't really a question. It was more of a comment, but I think we can ask Sergio if he has heard about it or if he knows. So Adam mentioned that he wonders if the Milwaukee principles might help plant trees. And have you heard of the Milwaukee method, Sergio?
Milwaukee, yes, I have heard. of this method, I have not experience with this method, but I'm so curious to try it in the near future.
Perfect. Yeah, we can send you more information on that. Yeah, it would be interesting to know if that's something that would work for
Actually, at this moment here where I am, we are trying a different method, something similar like Milwaukee method, but this is direct seedings. That is to put 40 kilograms of different forestal seeds with some fast growing species, and we put this in a blend after prepare all the soil. Yes, let's see the result. I'm experimenting in this moment this technique, but this direct seeding, and the inspiration of this method is in Brazil, that is really strong in this restoration method.
Oh, very nice. Yes, so keep updated with Sergio's. I put that link in the chat, but we will also, after this presentation, be sending out all these important resources. So Sergio does write blogs and stuff as a Mountain Restoration Steward. So I'm assuming that once you find out the results of that experiment, you'll put that in there. So we'll just have to keep updated with that. And go ahead, Abby, with the next one.
Sure. Yeah, we have 2 more questions for you, Sergio. The first one is, why do they need to enclose the restoration area?
Yes, this is important to protect the trees mainly of the cattle that is in the area. This is not only a coffee farm, there are also a neighborhood that has cows or cattle, so you have to protect these areas.
That makes perfect sense. Thank you. Tanya, do you want to do the next one?
And so the last one for you, Sergio, is you mentioned the shift from sun-grown to shade-grown coffee. As you mentioned, the sun dries up the soil, so that's not good. And so is there a corresponding consumer movement where you can support the species and types of coffee plants involved and the growing methods that restore biodiversity? Essentially, is there, like there's another certain certifications for certain products, you can check that as a consumer and say, oh, okay, I want to buy this product to support that.
Yeah.
So how do we know where to get our coffee from, essentially?
Yeah, in this world of the coffee, there are a lot of certification that show the consumer when the coffee has this shade grow process. So, for example, the rainforest certification, sometimes there are the triple A certification of Nespresso of a specific company are moving to this shade grow coffee.
Thank you, Sergio. So we'll have a few questions for Ayushi and Carol, and then we'll kind of wrap it up with questions for everyone.
So our next question for Ayushi, or first question for Ayushi, is what age groups is the Conserve Action project good for, and how long does it last? Is it only online?
Yes, so the game or interactive animation thing, it's part of the greater Healthy Soil Challenge that I have on my site. So I tried to make the general challenge accessible for learners of all ages so that everyone can participate. There are a few resource options for each topic, depending on how much previous knowledge you have and stuff, and like just the pathway you want to take. So hopefully it's good for all ages, but yes, the like interactive animation thing is definitely framed towards younger learners, but that definitely doesn't mean that any older learners can not participate in it. And then was the next question, how long is it?
Yeah, how long does the game last?
Yeah, so that particular animation, I think, would take around 10 to 15 minutes to go through, but the entire challenge is meant to be spread out over 3 days or 3 like sessions. So each part of the challenge is meant to be around the time frame of like a classroom lesson. And then is it only online? It's right now only online, but I'm working to get the online resource in a classroom or a local gardening program for elementary students here in Charleston.
Awesome, thank you, Ayushi. One of the other questions in the chat was just, is there a YouTube link to one of your dance pieces? So I will put that in chat right now. There's a link to the specific dance piece that Ayushi shared on the Conserve Action gallery. So I'm gonna link that right now. Tanya, do you wanna do the next question?
Yes, and so someone was really inspired, Maya was really inspired by your just creative examples of environmental advocacy. And so she was asking about workshops for these like art making workshops around eco-restoration and just envisioning what this different world that we're creating will look like and just changing the narrative. And so she was asking in the submissions that you receive and the work that you create as well, how do you strike a balance between spreading awareness for like the deforestation, but also communicating the hope and possibility of solutions? Because of course you want to be inspired as well.
Yeah, that's a great question because that is something that I think about every time that we put out a new resource or get a new submission. I think that the art can sometimes be pretty serious, but I will always try to link it to some action item, and definitely for the climate education resources I have, I try to keep them pretty optimistic and action driven because I hope that my audience will not become disheartened or like give up before they even begin their climate journey. So it is definitely a serious topic, especially with how close we're getting right now. But I think that even if the art piece seems a little bit like there's no hope, there's always something linked in that artist statement or a link to an education resource for something that the viewer can do to take action to make a positive impact for this, whatever issue it's focused on.
That's beautiful. Yeah, I think just getting deeper, once you dive deeper into every topic, you kind of find the solution eventually. But since you have it all right there, it's all curated for everyone. So thank you for that. And so now we're going to go into a question for Carol, and then we have a few questions that anyone can respond to.
So the question for Carol is another question from Maya. So first, a statement that she really loves that you mentioned the opportunity for addressing issues for social and economic inequality as well as climate change. And so can you say a little bit more about resilience and regeneration from both an ecological view and beyond?
Yeah, sure. So I think that, at least for me, one of the principles of regenerative agriculture is not only improving the environmental aspect or climate or soil, but also improving livelihoods. So improving the farmers' livelihoods and making sure that they are earning enough money and they are being recognized for doing this amazing work for nature and for the planet. And the FAO says that today around 70% of the world's food is produced by smallholder farmers. And in spite of that, we see that today, at least in Brazil, and I think the US is the same, there's a lot of finance like from the government for the opposite, for large-scale agriculture, monoculture, so traditional, conventional agriculture, which is very harmful for the planet. And I don't know in Brazil, but I don't know in the US, but in Brazil, most of this monoculture is like soybeans that is not going to the people's tables. So we grow soybean to feed cattle. So most of this food that is being produced here and in a very harmful way for the environment is not actually feeding people. So we need to kind of switch this mindset, and we need governments to help implement policy to try and advance that and advance this switch for conventional to regenerative agriculture. And another problem is that in a lot of countries, especially in the global south, so a lot of countries in Africa, South America as well, we have the problem because sometimes smallholder farmers don't have access to inputs. So they are very dependent on environmental conditions. So they're also the most affected by environmental hazards. Not only in the global south, but we also see that in California and in other states in the US as well. So they're very affected by environmental hazards. So if we improve soil health, soil biodiversity, and we switch to regenerative agriculture with the help of policy and governments, we can help create resilience to those communities and to those families, because they will be less dependent on inputs, fertilizers, so chemicals. They also be more, the crops will be more resilient to droughts or heavy rainfall. So we can create this resilience. And also in terms of like gender, there's also a lot of problems with women having access in rights to the land. So they are kind of dependent of their male counterpartner, or they receive less incentives to do the work and to farm. So we also need policy to kind of trying to change this, because we see that in many communities, in many countries, women are actually the first ones to lead the movement to whether help their neighbor in terms of when there's climate hazards or any kind of disaster. They are the first ones to kind of get together and try to help their neighbor. They are also the ones that are leading their families, especially in the global south. So we also need policy to help with that and help create resilience in those communities as well. So I don't know if I answered your question. I hope I did. Okay.
I think you did and more. So thank you for all of that. I'm gonna have to rewatch this recording and just like really take all of this in, because like there's so much information, great information. I actually have a question for you. I'm like, I don't know if it's okay to put my own question, but I feel like it might be important for everyone. As someone who is speaking like on these international levels, I think to an extent all of the speakers are, but because you're part of like the UN membership, just this very specific like global reach organizations, how do you feel being youth, being young? Because I just wonder, yeah, I don't know if you feel like there's enough representation for young people. I feel like a lot of times youth are leading their own organizations because they feel like they don't have that space. So I just wonder if that's what you feel like, or if you feel like there is enough representation.
I'm an optimist, so I feel like it's getting better and we're getting more recognition, I think more now than ever. But we are still underrepresented. So we're still not getting a seat at the table when it matters. So we have a lot of movements, we have a lot of visibility. So people are paying attention, the media is paying attention. But when it comes down to it, like even in the UN spaces, COP spaces, we are not getting enough voices inside the small rooms where the decisions are being made. So I feel like the youth movement is very large and get a lot of visibility on the streets. But when it comes down to making the actual decisions, we're still not being heard enough. And Yango is trying to kind of change that, because Yango is a part of the UNF CCC, we sometimes get a space in the discussion, but we don't have, I don't feel like we have enough power yet to change things the way things are made. But I do feel like it's getting better, and I can see that even in the UN or in politics, there are so many young people like taking the lead and trying to get a place and get a seat at a table. So I feel like we are in the middle of a transition. So I think it's only gonna get better.
Thank you. Yeah, that makes sense. And now we'll head to questions for all the speakers. So yeah, I think we'll maybe just go in order of presentation. So like just Sergio, then Ayushi, then Carol can answer all these questions.
So the first question we have for you all is, was there a moment when you realized you had to take action, and what was your tipping point?
Me? I have to answer first, no? But I don't understand the question. This.
Like, was there a moment where you had just this revelation, like, I have to do something, like, this is really important, I have a role,
Okay.
I need to start now?
In my case, was 10 years ago when I started to see the forest restoration as an option in my professional life. And this decision was at the moment where I started to see all the deforestation, the climate change, and this moment happened for me 10 years ago. I think that was the best decision that I had taken.
Ayushi, did you want to answer?
Yeah, for me, I think the moment was not necessarily when I realized I needed to take action, but more like when I realized I could take action, because like especially nowadays growing up, we always hear about climate change and environmental issues. So as long as I can remember, I always knew that there was some sort of problem, and I've always kind of been interested in it. But I think from watching some youth presentations, like I watched a bunch in the summer of 2020, and I started my project like just before then, my first Roots and Shoots project. And I think especially from watching the National Youth Leadership Council presentations for Roots and Shoots is when I realized I could really make a difference, actually from watching Abby's presentation and the rest of that cohort. And that was when I decided to apply for the Leadership Council for Roots and Shoots. And that was when I realized like I didn't have to just be passionate about like individual action. I could also start my own project.
For me, like I mentioned in the presentation, I kind of always knew that I wanted to do something, but I didn't know what and how to do it. So at least in my like social circles, I'm basically the only one that is very passionate about nature. So I didn't have anyone to talk to, anyone who shared my passion. And then I went to college and I met a few people who are also passionate about climate, but not all of them as well. And I think that's when I started kind of think, okay, I don't need to kind of find a person to do this. I just need to start it myself. And if nobody doing it, so let's create something and start calling people to come and do it as well. So what I found, I started joining communities, Yango and other communities in Brazil and international. And I was like, oh, I'm not alone. There's a lot of people doing this. And I can do it in my own city. I can do it at a national level. There's like, the sky's the limit. I just need to be willing to put in the work. And on soil biodiversity specifically, it was, like I said, I was shocked because soil biodiversity is so important. People were not talking about it. Then I was just like, okay, I need to do something about this and trying to educate people. And it's not an easy thing because people are not usually interested in soil fungi and bacteria. So I'm still trying to navigate that and trying to find the best way to get people to listen. But I think it's just, I don't know, just having the courage, like this 20 seconds of like insane courage to say like, okay, let's do this. And then it just goes.
I love that. Yeah, just get started. And this is all a journey for all of us. That's what we're doing today, just learning from one another so we can continue our journey. So I love that. And so the next question is, I actually really love this question because I feel like I also need it for myself, is how do you balance the desire to do this important work, to address these important crises, climate change and biodiversity loss, and also create a livable future for yourself? You know, as young people, we want to build a career, we want to be successful, whatever successful means, have a living, like have a livelihood. So how do you balance those that passion and also the like very need to just, you know, survive. So Sergio?
Yes, I was thinking to answer this question. It's about what do you call successful? For me, it's not a question of have more money or more material things. I think that if I find the motivation to do a project that push me to do something different, to have this this motivation to continue doing more. In the case of forest restoration, I can say to implement different restoration techniques, to plant more trees, to restore different ecosystems, to work with different communities. This is what I feel really attracted in the work.
Yeah, I think that that question is something that I'm thinking about for the future, since right now I'm just a freshman in college, but I think that the like exact definition of a successful life is one that makes a positive impact, especially in fighting the climate crisis. But yes, it is hard to consider where my career is going to go, because a lot of climate work, especially here in the US, is very volunteer based. So if I do want to go into scientific research, I definitely don't want to get stuck in the cycle of doing science like in a bubble and just going from research to research. So I think that that's where art will really help me in making connections to the communities I'm in, even if my career goes beyond volunteer activism.
Well, I'm trying to make this my career. So like I said, I was working at a fertilizer company, and then this year I decided to quit because although I was working with sustainability and climate, I didn't see myself in that role in the long run. So I wanted to kind of trying to find a position that I was really proud of, and I wanted to work for, I could see myself doing the work for 5 to 10 years. So I decided to quit my job, and I am now looking for a position in climate, and I haven't found that yet, but I'm also, like I said, I'm an optimist, because in 2019, when I had just graduated, I was looking for a climate job as well, and I couldn't find any positions in climate. I would see like 1 or 2, and they were really, really competitive. So there were a lot of applicants to the job. And now, since I quit my job, I've seen so many positions to work in climate in Brazil, South America, in the US. There are so many positions now, and I feel like it's only growing. I specifically want to work with land use, so agriculture or forestry. So I have been, it's been a little harder for me to get a position because I don't have a background in agronomy, for example. But I do feel like something is going to come up soon. And even if it isn't in land use, I can work in climate in other areas as well. Like I said, I'm a curious person. I like a lot of different topics. So I don't think that's going to be an issue. But and one thing that I can say is that Ayesha, you mentioned the US. There's actually this platform, this startup that they're doing this fellowship, and I'm a fellow there. It's called Climate Base, and they share so many jobs. It's like a job platform for just jobs in climate. So there's a lot of opportunity there. They share a lot of jobs. So yeah, I just wanted to throw this a suggestion.
Thank you. That's perfect. That kind of goes into our last question, actually. So Abby, please take it away.
Yeah, so for all of the speakers, what are some of your sources of inspiration? Are there any books or speakers, artists and organizations, or really anything you can think of that you would especially recommend to others that maybe played a significant part in your journey or your learning and inspiration?
Yeah, first my inspiration in my case was when I started my PhD, I always see the Brazilian forest restoration as a example. And in this world, the professor Ricardo Ribeiro Rodriguez, that was my mentor during my PhD. I admire his career and all the thing that he has made in the forest restoration is incredible since 30 years ago. So when I see 20 years in the future, I want to be someone like this professor. It's the Professor Ricardo Ribeiro Rodriguez, for the people that don't know. But I really recommend all his work, the books and all the things.
For me, like I said earlier, Dr. Jane Goodall is definitely my biggest source of inspiration. As far as like media goes, I would recommend her like newest book, The Book of Hope. I think that her voice really comes through clearly in this book, and it inspired a lot of my like sub projects within conservation. You'll definitely like come out of the book more hopeful and more optimistic. I'd also recommend a musical artist, Matthew Bertner. He's a composer, sound artist, and like I think his title is like eco-acoustician, but he uses music as a way to embed environmental change into sound art. So through recordings of like ice and melting glaciers, and I think his work is really cool and something that also inspires my dancing.
I'm really inspired by community. So like I said, I would get a sense of being alone in the space of climate and environment because my family and my friends were interested in that. And when I joined communities that people that were also passionate about that, that really gave me hope and keeps me motivated to this day. So I started joining a bunch of different communities, like I said, Yango, we have Global Youth Biodiversity Network, the Climate Reality Project, Engajamundo. So up to the international level, to national level, to local level, maybe just a group in my city. So just being a part of a community and seeing that there are so many other people also doing this work is really inspiring for me and makes me feel like I'm not alone. So it really, because it's very easy to feel helpless when it comes to climate change and feel like you're not doing enough and that everything is not going to work. But when you're a part of a community and see all these different people doing all this different amazing work all over the world, it's really inspiring. It keeps me motivated. And yeah, I think just talking to people, like I said, I'm a climate-based fellow right now, and we have a large community. We have like 100 fellows. So I really like just reaching out to them and say, hey, let's talk about 15 minutes. I want to know what you're doing, what's your background, what you want for the future. Just connecting with people and talking to people that really keeps me motivated. So yeah, just find your community and find people that are passionate about the same things that you are and talk to them.
Definitely. I know that's what keeps me going. But I will look up these other resources and we'll send them out there's some people who registered who couldn't make it today. So we're also going to give them all this information, the recordings. So yes, I believe that wraps up our questions. We're actually ending a bit earlier, I think, because our speakers are just so punctual and they're so experienced. They already know what they're doing. We don't even have to worry. I love it. So thank you everyone again for coming. Like I said, we're going to send all these resources so you can follow their work because obviously we love their work and we think it's important for you all to, keep in touch with them. And Abby, do you want to say our final words?
Yes, thank you. Thank you everyone for joining us. I feel really inspired after listening to all of the presenters and also hearing your answers to all of these questions. We want to encourage everyone to stay involved with us, stay updated with us. We have a bunch of opportunities at all different levels for people who want to get involved. So for example, we have a newsletter that comes out monthly. I'm going to put the link in chat. You can sign up for that and receive all of updates related to work that we're doing, courses, events that we're having, all sorts of things like that every month. We also have opportunities for volunteers and interns, and we are specifically looking for interns right now. So if you're interested in submitting an application either to volunteer or to intern, I will also put the link in chat for that, and we'll be sending all of these links as well in the email that Tanya mentioned. And yeah, we'll also, like Tanya mentioned, be sending out this email with other resources, the chat from this meeting or this conference, and yeah, the links to learn more about all of our presenters and Bio for Climate as well. And so that's all I have. I'm really grateful to have heard from all of you speakers and also get to spend the past few hours with all of the participants today. So thank you all for coming.